X-Men Dark Phoenix, the newest addition to the X-Men franchise. Is it as bad as critics and fans are saying it is? Well, I hate to admit it, but it's definitely not the best in the franchise. Now, first of all, I tolerated most of these films. There were some really great ones, which most of them were great, and then you had a few which weren't so great. The worst one I would say was easily X-Men Origins Wolverine, and anybody else can agree on that one. It was a rather lame and incoherent, messy prequel, which I almost gave up faith, and luckily First Class redeemed the whole prequel franchise right back from the dead, and then continue its success with Days of Future Past. X-Men 3 may have hit a bit of a speed bump, and I tolerated X-Men Apocalypse, and I liked that film, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who did, despite rather negative reactions from critics. So, I was interested to see how the Dark Phoenix character can be done the right way, especially after X-Men 3 was a bit of a split reaction between fans and critics alike, because, yeah, I can definitely agree it's the typical unlucky third movie. It could have done a lot better. Now, this film was supposed to try to reboot that whole scenario and take place, obviously, during the 90s after the events of X-Men Apocalypse, and it started out kind of strong for the most part. You know, you had most of the cast back, like James McAvoy as Charles Xavier. Yeah, it's all the younger versions of themselves. Michael Fassbender as Magneto. Of course, Sophia Turner as Jean Grey herself, who, as you know, becomes Dark Phoenix. So, yeah, I'm not going to go too heavy duty on spoilers on this one, but let's be very clear. This is not the strongest in the franchise. In fact, it ranks right next to X-Men Origins Wolverine. I will say a little bit better, with some of the fight sequences actually being a little enjoyable for some parts. And as I said, the beginning starts off a little bit strong. But as you know, what comes up must come down, and that definitely applies for this film. I like the whole, how she's struggling to adjust to her powers, because we know where she gets her powers from, at least in this movie. And I like how they show her childhood, you know, at the beginning of the movie briefly, almost like X-Men 3, and how Charles Xavier tries to fix her and basically control her. So it does get a little bit personal with the issues that she's going through with trying to control her powers. I like that, that's fine. But then it just becomes messy after that. It goes off on its own foot, and it just, I don't know, it just can't control its own self, the plot in general. Not just her own powers, but yeah, it seems like it's just so all over the place. And yeah, then you get the main villain played by Jessica Chastain. Not very interesting, and I just feel like this movie in general is just rushed to begin with. It just feels like it's, as I said, all over the place. It slows down it too much with the pacing, and despite some good action sequences, it really just doesn't stay consistent enough. So, yeah, I hate to sound like I'm hopping on the bandwagon and agreeing with critics and fans on this one, but yeah, it's not the best. And for a nearly 2-hour runtime, it could have been a lot better. I mean, they had all this time, more than a year, considering this film was supposed to be released last year, as you could tell by my anticipated list of 2018, and then of this year, since, yeah. And it's like they could have done a lot better. But it just seems like they were in a hurry to get this one done. And I'm like, really? All that time they could have done better? I'm not going to go into detail on which characters get killed off, but there is a little bit of a surprise to it. But it's not really one that you really care about, considering after all this, how much of a mess it was. And continuity-wise, I feel like it doesn't fit into, you know, later on into the film, especially towards the end of it. It's like, it doesn't make much sense, it's incoherent, and for the most part, it's definitely probably the worst in this series. So, again, not terribly bad. You get some enjoyment out of it with some of the special effects and everything, but then you wonder to yourself, was it really worth all that? No. I mean, they could have done better than X-Men 3, but that film at least had some good performances, and this film did too as well, especially out of some of the main cast and everything. I will laud them for the most parts, but in general, it was bland, unappealing, main villain wasn't great, and it just didn't stay very consistent, as I mentioned. And I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but believe me, this is not the best in the series. So, it's a shame to admit, but yep, that about does it, people. The X-Men franchise didn't exactly end on a high note, and I'm not sure what's going to become of the New Mutants film. I know with Disney's buyout of Fox and everything like that, it probably had a lot to do with it, but They could have made this film better. It sadly didn't help by much. So, yep, this one is anything but excellent. So, my final verdict is Weird Mode Wii Motion Plus down, and we'll plane Weird Mode up. I will want a few things, but for the most part, it's anything but great. So, till next time, keep watching.